Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Erin and this is your first time here. Welcome to Booked and Busy. Today's video is going to be episode number 2 in my creature feature series. Episode 1 was the vampire vlog. I'll leave a link up here if you want to check it out if you haven't watched it already. And episode 2 is the dragon vlog. If you've been around here any length of time, you know that I love dragons, I love dragon shows, I love dragon books. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time reading some dragon fantasy. So we've got a little bit of everything here. We've got Boy and His Dragon, we've got paranormal dragon romance, we've got void dragons, we've got a little bit of everything. So if you're interested in seeing what dragon books I'm going to be reading, keep on watching. So I want to quickly mention, we're going to go over the TBR here. I'm not going to give synopses for these books. I'm going to give you more in-depth synopses when I'm actually reading and reviewing them, but I'm going to just tell you what you have to look forward to in the beginning. So the two of them that I don't own physically right now, first up we've got The Dragon's Bride by Katie Robert, and you know I had to couldn't help myself. And also we have To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monoquill Black Goose. This is an indigenous dragon school type of book, so I had to add this one to the list as well. We've got a little bit more dragon fantasy romance with Fear the Flames by Olivia Rose Darling. This is a book talk darling, so it only makes sense to put some fantasy romance in this here video. We've got YA political fantasy reimagining of the French Revolution but with dragons with Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. The classic Boy and His Dragon tale, we've got Aragon by Christopher Paolini. An indie Boy and His Dragon meets Zelda story with Ascendant by Michael R. Miller. A historical approach to what if dragons were real and people actually studied them, and A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. Queer dragons but gods and Dragonfall by L.R. Lamb. A bit of a different take and a bit of a revival, if you will, of The Boy and His Dragon with Dragon Mage by M.L. Spencer. And last but certainly not least, The Big Daddy, a queer dragon fantasy, Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. So these are the books that I'm going to be reading over the course of this video. So I'm excited for you to see my thoughts on them. If you want to make a prediction about which of these books you think I'm going to enjoy the most, leave that down below and let's get into the vlog. Friends, I have finished my first book for this vlog, and that was Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. So I didn't give you any like mid-book updates with this one because I was really just like sitting with it and reading it because I had to read this one physically. I didn't have an ebook, so it just was all over the place. But I finished it up today and I liked it. I enjoyed it. It's not a new favorite, but I did like it. I think I'm gonna set up on like a 3.5 star. So I'm gonna get the cons out of the way first because there are few, and then get into the things I really enjoyed about this. So first con, honestly, I think this was a little bit too long. That's the first thing for a YA book, and I have read much longer YA books, but the pacing of the story, things that happen, I think it could have been done a little bit tighter. There is a competition that takes place for the majority of this book, or at least like the first half of this book, and then after that things go along. So I definitely could have cut it down a little bit. This was about, I want to say 432 pages, and I think it could have been tightened up to maybe like 375. Okay. Also, I think that's my main complaint. I think it was a little bit too long. Other than like the dragons, there is no magic or anything like that in this world. It just takes like in a completely different world on this island, but otherwise like it's a standard world. Pros were the pros, the things that I liked about it. This author, the reason I was intrigued by picking this up is because she has a degree in political theory, and I love complex political dynamics in fantasy books. So I was confident that going into this I would get that, and I did. I thought it was really well done, was really intricate. It was really very real, very well realized. Like you could see how this is shortly after a revolution and what the reformation of a government would look like, and how it also has a very intricate and detailed exploration of corruption and how absolute power corrupts absolutely, basically, and how people can revolt and form new governments based on the perfect ideals. But when you have one group of people in complete and total power over another and are completely able to subjugate those people without those people having a voice of their own, you will fall into the same pitfalls as soon as pressure is applied. I think this is a very intricate and well done exploration of that. Also, I think that our two main characters, Annie and Lee, are very well realized. They have very complex backstories and complex motivations that are almost the inverse of one another, and their dynamic between the two of them is very fraught with tension, and it explores the intimacies of grief and trauma bonding, and what that looks like in when you are competing against one another but also have these unexplored feelings for one another. And I thought that was very well done. For me personally, while I like these characters and I think even the side characters were very well realized, I think with very few changes, this could have very well been an adult book, like easily. I think the characters are like 16, 17, 18, something like that, so that's probably it. But like beyond the character ages, they don't read young. I see no difference in why this couldn't be an adult book. It just would be published by a different publisher, and at that point it might be a little bit longer, or it could be this length, but I think it will justify those pages a bit more. But I thought it was well done. I enjoyed it. I anticipate enjoying the rest of the series. I do own books 2 and 3, and just based on this book alone, I think I would read more from Rosario Munda. I personally didn't find myself really connecting with Annie and Lee, and because there really was no magical world for me to latch onto, and I didn't really care about the characters, and the plot wasn't the most intriguing, so I guess we do. So ultimately my experience with this is positive, and it is one that I recommend. I think that regardless of whether you predominantly read YA fantasy or adult fantasy, I think if you like political explorations and you like dragons, I will say on the dragon scale, I would give this 1 dragon, which is how much dragons are prevalent in the story. Like, the dragons are there throughout, but the dragon interactions to me are minimal. Like, we only see the dragons when they're riding the dragons, and these dragons don't talk, they don't interact with the characters in any additional ways other than being dragon bonded, and so we don't see like that process in comparison to like a fourth wing or something like that. This is, I would say, the dragon amount in here is similar to that of like a Rage of Dragons, where the dragons are more a system of like military might and a system of power and an indicator of power than anything else. And we don't get a lot of lore about the dragons. Like, there are 3 different types, but other than the different types of dragons, we don't really have that many distinguishing factors about the different types of dragons. We don't know much about the dragons. We don't know the dragons. So like, the dragons themselves are not characters in the book. They just are a tool of the powerful to subjugate powerless. So that's the first look down, and let's get into the next one. For my next read, I decided that I wanted to read a paranormal fantasy romance, and for this one I picked up The Dragon's Bride by Katie Robert. Now, this one was intriguing to me when it first came out because it had a really like clinch cover, which, you know, you don't expect to see when it comes to fantasy, well, monster romance. But ultimately we follow this main character who is also, before I get into that, trigger warning for domestic abuse. That's kind of how the story sets out, and we don't really see it on page, but the ramifications of that and like processing that trauma is very much a big part of the story. So keep that in mind if you decide to pick this one up. So we follow our main character, who is in an abusive relationship and has been trying to escape from her husband, and she is struggling with that, and she makes a deal with this demon to go into this contract for 7 years to be a bride to some type of monster in this like other world. And in exchange for that, she will get, you know, safety and money, and she also will get her husband dealt with. So we follow her and that's all happens like in like the first chapter. So her and a group of 6 other women all have agreed to this compact with this demon, and they each are put up at this auction where these various monster rulers of these parts of this world are, you know, auctioning for to get a partner, because having a human partner and like having a baby with that human partner in this world gives you higher access and imbues more magic in the offspring, things like that. And so for too long, the other factions have not had like human women or humans involved in this like process, and so the magic has gotten diluted over the generations. So that's kind of how you have like a dragon, a kraken, a demon as like the series goes on, because they are these various leaders of these groups of people. So we follow our main character, or the love interest, who he had this romance, but his parents broke it off because they're like, you need to get a human bride so that you can have a baby, so that we can increase our magic, and it also helps like the territory out. And so for whatever reason, only the demons can like go to the other world, which is our world, and, you know, make these compacts with humans, because the demons for whatever reason have the highest access to this magic, because they have been able to access humans this whole time. So our main character, she is auctioned off to this dragon man, and she goes away with him, and the goal of the dragon, she has to agree to allow him to seduce her. The dragon and all the people want a child, but obviously she has to fully consent and be okay with having a child, and then if she still wants to leaving that child there, because obviously the monster baby wouldn't be accepted into like our society. So it's a very short and sweet, I want to say it's more novella than novel, but I think there's like a specific word count or whatever that indicates whether it's a novella or novel. But it's very short and sweet, very quick and easy read. I read it on the plane, and it was very easy to get into. And so we follow as our main character, who has been struggling like for the past like decade or so with domestic violence and living in like unsafe conditions, and she's like in this completely new environment with actual dragon men, and we're watching her as she grows more confident, as she heals from her trauma. And I think, you know, I haven't personally dealt with domestic violence, so I can't say, but I think that, you know, take my opinion with a grain of salt, but I think that the way that domestic violence and recovery and moving on from that is handled very well, because both she and the love interest acknowledge that like you're a survivor, but also you cannot go from that situation to this situation and immediately just be okay. You have to, it takes time, it takes continued safety, it takes a lot of things for you to feel safe and to feel confident, feel comfortable, and I don't want to do anything to jeopardize your safety. And so it's a bit of a slow burn watching them, you know, get to know one another and come together and have this romance. So I enjoyed it. I gave it 3 stars. I don't know if I would continue on with the series, because I think I bought this ebook. I don't know if it's in KU. It might be, but I remember buying this ebook way back when, so that's how I read it. I would have to give this one 5 dragons, because the dragon is a main character. He has a POV, he talks, he's in most scenes. So the dragon, if you want a monster romance that has pretty high dragon content, pick this one up. You know, I can't say that the dragons were not present. I will say only one other dragon was present in the story. So should I maybe give it 4 dragons? I don't know. I'm gonna let y'all decide in the comments if the dragon's bride should get 4 or 5 dragons. But I don't know if the number of dragons is as significant when there is such a large dragon presence. So I'm not sure what I'm gonna start next, but because this one was so short, I only gave you my final thoughts. But the next one, I'm gonna get 20-30% in, and then I'll come back and give you an update. Hello friends. So I am just over 50% into To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monoquill Black Goose, the first book in the Nempishuisit series. This is an adult fantasy that is taking place in like not colonial age, but kind of colonial age America, and we follow a young indigenous woman as she attends this colonial dragon school. And this is an adult fantasy, but our main protagonist is 15, so I could see it reading pretty young. I might give it maybe new adult, but I mean it says it's adult, so fine, whatever, I don't care. But I gotta say I'm not loving this. I don't know if I would be liking it more if I was reading it physically. Well, I don't know if I would finish it if I was reading it physically. Because one thing I will say is that the audiobook is definitely the way to go with this one, because there's so many words that are used that are difficult to glean the meanings of. Like, I think a lot of the words here a lot of the words that are specific to Anekosu, is that her name? Something like that. Have to do, they might hail from a specific tribe or group of people, like that are actual indigenous people. But then a lot of the other words I want to say have like a German origin almost, and I don't speak German, but this one it's very bland and not a lot is happening. So we're following Anekus as she discovers a dragon egg on her island, and prior to the start of the novel, the English with an A have conquered America, the Americas, whatever, and they've set up their own society, and there are dragons. And to have a dragon, they have these policies that are very different than that of the indigenous peoples, and they have essentially made it so that any dragon that's not bonded to a rider and that doesn't follow the codes that they have set out is essentially feral and should be killed on sight. And our main character finds a dragon egg, the dragon attaches itself to her, it chooses her. And so her brother finds out, like, if they find out that you had the dragon, we didn't report it, there are going to be consequences. So even with reporting it, there are consequences, but she has to go to this dragon school on the mainland and acclimate to that and successfully complete the college, otherwise her dragon will be destroyed. And all the racism and things that you would expect from a young indigenous woman going to essentially a colonizer school 100% is the case. She's been, people are surprised that she can read, and they call her a savage and her people, and are you glad to be in civilized society, and ask her about, like, the carnal nature of their women and how they do this and that. And so, that isn't the best to read about, but that's an accurate representation of what this type of situation would be like. So I don't necessarily have a problem with, like, the story, but for one thing, I don't typically read urban fantasy or fantasy that is set in our world. And when you have the conquerors being the English and all of that, like in the War of 1825 and this and that, like it's so close to our actual history and to the real world that it doesn't feel fantastical. Like, if you take out the dragons, there's no magic, and the way that the dragons are talked about and treated, like our main dragon that belongs to Anekus, she like sits on her shoulder and like sits in her lap and walks around with her, and so it's very much giving kitten or puppy. It's she has like breathe fire or something like that. And I guess like the magical element is that she can shape the dragon's breath, which is the thing that they're learning how to do, and make it not be lethal, make it be something else, whatever. But because her dragon is still very young, she can't really do that yet, and she doesn't know how to do that. And so it's very much just like a not Regency, but like a historical novel where we're following a young girl, like a coming of age, going to school and whatever. So we're following her in her classes, we're making friends, and it's very much on the nose, or here's what my people do and this and that, and like educating all the colonizer kids about what they have going on, and it's not very engaging. And like where I am in the story, I'm almost 300 pages in, nothing really has happened. My camera battery is flashing, so I might get cut off, but I'm not really enjoying it. It's not very compelling. And another thing that's bothering me is that the chapter titles are like a very bland summary of what's going to happen. She conversed again with Liberty. 4 acquaintances dine together. The other students arrive. Like, I would have rather you just say chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. But I'm listening to the audiobook of this on my commute. I'm reading about 25-30% a day. I'm not loving it. At this point, I don't think I would be continuing on with this series. And it's not necessarily a book that I recommend, which I hate because I want to love this indigenous dragon fantasy and promote it. But nothing is really happening. And it's not even like, oh, there's no external plot. There's no internal plot either, because Anekos is not growing. She's not changing. She's not developing. Not necessarily that she could in this environment, but like it's just plodding along, and that's not interesting to me. The school is just not doing very much for me. So I'm gonna go because my camera's flashing, and I'll talk to you later. Bye. So ignore my kitchen, but I have finished To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monoquill Black Goose, and I think it got better. I think the second half was a lot stronger than the first half, and part of that I think is because a bit of a romance or romances were introduced. One thing that I had forgotten about this story is that it is marketed as queer, you know, potentially polyamorous. So our main character, Enikus, she has a female and a male love interest, and in her culture, that's perfectly okay, and there is no negative connotation or, you know, beliefs about women and women being together and divorce and all these things like that. And we get some, you know, almost heavy-handed explanations of that to the people in English society, but a bit of coup attempts to happen and a lot more political things that are going on. And so despite not intending to be this way, Enikus has almost become like a representative of the Naki people, because she is the second student to the second Naki person to be a student at this dragoneering school, but she is much more outspoken, and her situation, her circumstances are a lot different because she was raised amongst her people, whereas the other person, which is also one of the love interests, was raised among the English and was always taught, you know, a lot of negative things about Naki people. And I appreciated how in this one we spent a lot, in the second half we spent a lot more time actually visiting her culture and just interacting with her people, rather than like getting these lectures and all these other things about what their society and what their customs and things like that were like. I think that, and on the one hand, the second book is probably going to head in a bit more of an interesting direction. I'm not absolutely sure if I would be continuing, and if you're going to pick this up, I actually really recommend listening to it on audio, because I think that's probably the best way to get through it, and like having a pronunciation guide or just having someone pronounce all these words that would be unfamiliar. Although I will give it to the book, I'm looking at it now, it does have a pronunciation guide at the front, so maybe if you are okay with, you know, flipping back and forth to make sure that you're pronouncing things correctly and not stumbling across so many words all the time, that could be the way to go. But this is marketed as an adult book, but at least at this point I would say then our main character is 15 going on 16, so I definitely would say I can see what most people in the reviews say, that this is YA, or they think it's YA even though it's marketed as adult. Depending on the direction the series goes, I guess, but this would easily be YA, and I think it is suitable for younger readers. I'm not sure what book I'm gonna be reading next for this video, but you'll know when I know. Bye. Friends, I started A Natural History of Dragons earlier today, and I am running through it. I listened to this on audio because it was recommended by Angela that the audio was like the best experience for it, and it is narrated by Kate Redding, is a narrator that I'm very familiar with. She narrates Stormlight and Wheel of Time, so I've listened to quite a bit of Kate Redding. So in this one, it's a memoir of Lady Trent, and I'm curious to see how she becomes Lady Trent, because Trent is neither her maiden name or her married name. So maybe she has a second husband along the way, I don't know. But we're following her from a young age. I think we meet our main character Isabella when she's 14, and she first is like gets this spark of interest in dragons and natural history and things like that. And we follow her as she becomes a young woman, as she has to put down this interest for more ladylike things, as she gets married, and now as she has maneuvered her husband into going on this adventure where she is gonna sketch out and document this dragon, because they're going dragon hunting and things like that. So I am 212 pages, which is about 60% of the way through this one, so I'm confident that I'll finish this one up pretty soon. But I am liking it. It does remind me a little bit of oh, the sun is moving in the sky, my apologies. It is reminding me of like a Veronica Speedwell meets Emily Wilde. That's kind of how I would compare it. But obviously this one is much more fantastical than Veronica Speedwell, and Isabella isn't as annoying as Emily Wilde. And of course, dragons to me are much more interesting than Fae. So I'm enjoying this. I don't have much to say about it. I can tell it's not a new favorite, but I definitely think I would continue on with the series. And even though listening to the audiobook, there are these really great illustrations in the book of Isabella's drawings and things that she's documenting on this journey that I think definitely add to like the physical reading experience. And this is like the town that they're in to see the dragons. So it's very cool, and I like the way that it's put together. And this makes me even more excited to read Marie Brennan's co-authored work, which is The Mask of Mirrors. So enjoying this one. Gonna finish it up soon, and I'll be back to talk to you about my final thoughts. Friends, I've completed, what is this called? A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan this morning, and I wanted to come to you and give you my final thoughts. I enjoyed this one. I think I'm going to settle on a 3-star rating. I think that I would have enjoyed it more had it been more about the dragons. There was a bit of a mystery that kind of developed in the last half of the book that I think took up a lot of the space in the narrative that I really just didn't care about or care for. I didn't really care about the interactions between our group of adventurers and the people of this town. Those interactions, well, I guess important to like the context. I really only cared about the dragons and what was going on with the dragons. So I would probably give this one 2 dragons out of 5, because dragons as a concept were present for a lot of this. But actual dragons on the page were very few and far between, and those were usually very sparse. And that's because like we're researching dragons, not so much as like riding dragons or interacting with dragons or anything like that. Obviously these dragons didn't talk, or if they did, we haven't gotten close enough to communicate with them when they're alive. So ultimately I enjoyed this. I would probably continue on with the series, and I would probably just borrow the audiobooks or ebooks from the library and pick them up. I do feel like I manifested some less than ideal circumstances for our main character with one of my earlier comments, but I'm intrigued to see where the rest of the series goes, because like the way that this is framed is she's telling us her life story after the fact, and so as one tends to do, she kind of alludes to some things that will happen later, and she'll be like, oh, that's a story for another day, or I'm getting ahead of myself, like that. And in this one, her role was much more of a background character. She was just an artist and taking notes. But the way that it sets up the next book in the series, A Tropic of Serpents, I think she's going to be a much more active participant, even though she was pretty active here. But it was just always her pushing against the bounds of her role on this expedition. But I think in the next one and in the follow-up books in this series, she would definitely be a more active participant, because as her fame and acclaim grows, she'll have more of a space and more of a voice in what is essentially a male-dominated field. So I did enjoy this, and I would recommend this. I think if you're a fan of Veronica Speedwell, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, or even like it's not the same type of story, but it's the same vibe, Half a Soul by Olivia Outward. I think if you're a fan of any of those, I think you could really like this. And of course it has dragons, so it does make it the superior in this one. And there is a little bit of a romance, but it's not to the point where it would be like a Veronica Speedwell. But I'm hoping that we would get more romantic leaning nature type things in future installments. So that is another book down for ye old dragon vlog. I'm not sure what I'm going to pick up next, but you'll hear about it in just a second. Hello friends, I have started the next book for this vlog. I am 120 pages into Dragonfall by L.R. Lamb. So I started this yesterday. Well, that's not exactly true. I started this a few days ago. I read the first like 30 pages and then I didn't have the ebook, so I put it back down. And then yesterday I just caved and I got the ebook. And I was thinking that I was struggling to read it because I didn't have the ebook and I only had the physical copy and hardcover, and with my arthritis, you know, I'm having a tough time. But honestly, I think I'm just not enjoying it that much, because it would take me like 40 minutes to read 20 pages, and if you know anything about my reading, you know that's abnormal. I have sped up a bit with the ebook, but I'm still not loving it. So at this point, I doubt I'll be continuing on with the series. I am going to finish it. It's not bad. I'm just not loving the way that the world is being built. It feels very imbalanced. And I'm not really connected to the characters. I think the most intriguing thing about it is like the lore of this world and their relationship with dragons, and how dragon history and culture play into this current culture. So I haven't told you what this is about at all, but Dragonfall is the first book, I don't want to say in the Dragon Scale series, and in this one we primarily follow 2 POVs, but there is a 3rd POV. So we follow Aragon, who is the last male dragon, and he is prophesied to bring them back into their homeland because centuries ago the humans betrayed the dragons and the dragons were almost banished and escaped to this other realm. And since then, over the course of the centuries, the humans have forgotten their hateful ways and they actually worship the dragons now. And we follow this boy named Arcady, who was out on this mission to change his fortune because of some circumstances in his parentage. He is unable to assume the roles that he should have in life, and so he's a thief and a con man, and he's trying to change his situation. And in the first chapter, we see Arcady do this like spell, because there is magic in this world, and he essentially opens a veil between the realms and pulls Aragon in, and they have this bond with one another, similar to the bonds of old between dragons and humans. And in the 3rd POV, we follow someone who is an acolyte, or you know, to a priestess, and they've taken this vow of silence, but they're also like a secret assassin and spy for one of the high priests. And I'm not sure how these 2 storylines are going to connect, because it's very clear how Arcady and Aragon connect, but it's not clear how Soren connects to the larger story that's being told. And we only get Soren POV, like in 120 pages we've only gotten 2 chapters from Soren's POV, so we don't see them as often as we see the other 2 characters. And based on some reviews that I read last night, there's apparently going to be some type of romance between Aragon and Arcady. This book does have some interesting things to say about gender, which I appreciate, but I don't think it was handled in the best way possible. It wasn't very subtle. No, and not that it has to be, but it just is a very noticeable, heavy-handed way of introducing like a queer normative world. I've read much better like entries into queer normative worlds in sci-fi and fantasy, but I am planning on finishing this today. I have to work all day actually, and I have about 200 pages left, and it's 9:30 in the morning and I work until 9 p.m. so I have a lot of time throughout the day to get this read, because the bookstore is pretty slow in the evenings, and my main priorities for the day are editing a video and setting up my classroom. So hopefully I will get this knocked out today, and that is all I have for you. I will check in with you probably when I'm done, because I don't really have that much to say now. I don't anticipate that changing as the book goes on, so I'll probably just come back with my final thoughts. I'm back. I may look familiar from the beginning of the video, and that's because life has been kicking my ass, and I took a couple weeks off vlogging because I started a new job, and things were really hectic with that, but I still did the reading. So I'm here to give you a bunch of reviews for books that I have read since then. So first up, I'm going to finish my final thoughts. I finished it that same day, but I didn't film like an outro clip for this book, and that is Dragonfall by L.R. Lamb. So I finished this, and ultimately it's a 2-star read. This was a book I was really anticipating, but unfortunately it did not meet those expectations. I think that this was honestly very dense and very difficult to read, and it took so much time to read, which doesn't make sense because it's not a particularly complex story, nor is it particularly long. I think this is just a case of the writing style not meshing with me. And while I did to a degree like the romance, I wasn't really a fan of how the dragons in this world are represented. Like, dragons being gods and being worshipped was really intriguing until you kind of see how that actually is happening. And even with the way that it ended, you would think that that ending would have a lot of intrigue and make me want to pick up the next book, and maybe I would feel differently if the next book was already out. But this is a book that is not going to be one that I remember for very long, nor is it one that I look upon fondly and I'm thinking like, oh, I can't wait till the next book comes out. I didn't find myself particularly invested in the characters. I had to like actively force myself to sit down and read it because I didn't want to DNF, because I was intrigued while I was reading enough to finish it, but not enough to anticipate a second book and continue on. I know that it is a trilogy. It's the Dragon Scales trilogy, but ultimately this is not one that I recommend, and it does not get my stamp of approval. So in switching gears, I wanted to read something very different from that I could easily sink into, that wouldn't be particularly dense. So I decided to go into fantasy romance, and I have read the entirety of Fear the Flames by Olivia Rose Darling. So this is a fantasy romance about this young woman who, when she's born, the seer comes to the castle and to celebrate her birth, and essentially he gifts her these 5 dragon eggs and puts them in like her crib and bonds her to these dragon eggs. And because of this, her father, the king, sees her as a threat, and as a result, he from when she's a child, she is locked up and separated from the dragon. She is tortured. She is, food is withheld. She's not treated like a princess of the realm. She lives in this dungeon. Her guards beat her. Her family is very cruel to her because her father views her as a threat to his authority, because when she is of age, she has these 5 powerful dragons, and it seems like they're the only dragons in the realm, which I would have liked to know more about where these dragons came from, all that. But all this happens primarily off page, because when we meet our character, I think she's 23, and she has escaped from her family with her uncle, who was also a guard at the castle. And the catalyst for her uncle removing her from the castle was that her father tried to forcibly break the bonds between her and the dragons. The dragons lashed out, released a bunch of fire, and the queen, her mother, was killed in the blast, and the queen was this uncle's sister, and he was like, I don't want this to happen to you, whatever. He takes her away. She founds this kingdom in the forest, and the forests of these lands are unclaimed lands in a way, and they belong to the gods, and people don't really live there. And she has created this community of foundlings, of people who are outcasts where they are from, or they are running from something, and they come together. And she is having trouble feeding everyone because this is land where it's difficult to grow things, and that's part of the reason people don't live there. And at the beginning of the novel, she is at a tavern, and she hears that the commander for a foreign army is looking for her. She makes a deal with him to meet up with him and tell him where the princess is. She doesn't tell him that she is a princess, and the deal that he wants to make is that you will come under our protection. We will give you food and help give you resources to feed your people if you align with us to attack your father, because he's a bit of a tyrant and he has a negative relationship with the countries surrounding them. and they're like, what we're also gonna do, you and I, we're gonna pull off this heist, and we're gonna go to the castle and free your dragons, and when the coming war comes, you and your dragons are gonna fight for us. Okay, that's the setup. Now my problem comes in with the dragon heist part. Doesn't happen until 70% of the story. And this book is 500 and I want to say like 86 pages. So I have a couple problems with this. So the first one is the writing. The way that the story is told makes it seem like this would be a medieval type setting, because they don't have running water, they don't have electricity, things like that. So that, you know, there are horsebacks and pails and all these other things that make you seem ye olden days. But then the writing feels very modern, and in addition to the writing feeling very modern, just with like the style, it also has lines like "smut is my soul food," and just imagine him in the romance section of the bookstore. It doesn't align with the tone and the setting, and all these things like don't mesh well together to me. And so our main character, I found her to be a bit annoying. This is a problem I have so often, is I feel like when authors write romances, I feel like they put more energy into making the love interest appealing and, you know, someone that you're attracted to, or making them this like really big and bold character, and they don't put that same energy into the female main character. And I feel like a lot of the times the love interests outshine the main characters, and that's not something that I enjoy, because I did like him more. And, you know, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is single POV from the girl's perspective. It's been a minute since I finished this, but I think that that's the case. And I would have liked, and this is always my criticism with that when I read fantasy romance, I always want the other person's POV, and I don't feel like we got that. And I will say this had a really great found family. I liked the commander's friends, and they really just kind of attached themselves to Elowen, who is the main girl character, and they really believed in one another. And another thing that I loved about this book is our main character Elowen has this male best friend, and they are ride or die for each other. They're like siblings. They're so close, and so rarely do we see, you know, male-female relationships like that are just platonic and not romantic in any way. And I think this was a really great representation of that. And they fought and they argued and they, you know, had disagreements, but they were really there for one another, and I appreciated that relationship. But like, to me, the way the setup was, it makes me think that the heist was going to be the bigger part of the story, but it wasn't. The larger part of the story was this like alliance with getting his food sent back, and that honestly just isn't that exciting of a plotline, because while all that's happening, they're dilly-dallying around town, they're checking out the cafes and the bakeries and having fun and border skirmishes and sending letters and doing this and that. And I guess you need that time for the romance to develop, but like for the plot, like it's not very well distributed. I don't think I'll be continuing on with this series. And for the dragons, I forgot to give you the dragon rating for Dragonfall. I would give this one dragon because like one of our main characters is a dragon, but he's in his human or praetorian, I think is what he calls it. He's in his praetorian form the entire book. So one dragon honestly feels quite generous. I would give this 0 dragons, because we don't get the first scene of the dragons until page 480 of 586, and that's like 5 pages. Okay, and 5 pages feels generous because I was obviously reading on my Kindle. And then we don't see the dragons again until page like 570 for like 3 or 4 pages. So I would give this 0 dragons. And for a book that has dragons on the cover, has dragons for the art of every chapter header, the dragons just aren't a very large, let me not even say a very large part, the dragons are not a part of the story. Like, they're talked about occasionally, like, oh, I miss my dragons. Like, we don't even learn the dragons' names, like, because she doesn't have a relationship with the dragons because she's never been around them. And I think to a degree that's kind of some lazy world building, because like I said, we don't know where the dragons came from. We don't know if these other countries have dragons, because the eggs had to come from somewhere. So yeah, didn't love that one. I think I set it on like a 3-star, and I feel like it barely scraped a 3-star, but I did like the romance. I didn't love it. I wasn't particularly connected to the characters, but I did like the romance well enough. So that's Fear the Flames. I'm currently fighting with the setting sun to film this update, so please bear with me. But let's talk about The Boy and His Dragon books. So when you think of The Boy and His Dragon, there is one book I think that comes to mind, and that is Aragon by Christopher Paolini, the first book in, I want to say, the Inheritance Cycle. I was going to say the Aragon Cycle. So when I was going to do the Dragon, I'm like, I have to read Aragon. It is a classic, and let me tell you one thing before I even get into the review. Christopher Paolini has sons, and I'm going to talk to you about 2 of his sons in just a second. So Aragon is a YA fantasy, classic fantasy series about a young boy named Aragon who discovers a dragon egg one day in the forest, and he goes on an adventure. And I quickly realized that this story, while impressive for a teenager to write, overall is not complex enough or intricate or detailed enough for me as a reader. And this was a book that I've always known about. You know, I knew about it when I was a child, but I was never intrigued to pick it up, and I in my adulthood have never desired to pick it up until I was specifically filming this vlog, and I thought it would be a disservice to not pick it up. So we follow our main character Aragon. In this book, there is no build up, there is no slow build to action, none of that. It goes straight to the point. Within like chapter 1, Aragon finds the dragon egg. Chapter 1, he finds the dragon egg, brings it back home, and he goes on this adventure with this storyteller in his hometown who seems to be more than a storyteller and knows more about the things that are happening in this world than a regular storyteller would. And at least 2 other books also do the same thing. And so I had heard that these other books were quite similar to this, and I hadn't read one of them yet, so I wanted to read this one first. And I really don't connect with Aragon as a main character. I didn't really like Saphira, who is the dragon who is on the cover, and a lot of this book is a quest, and I learned that I'm not really a quest girl. I would rather you can skip all of that and just take us to the destination and let the story commence. Or if there's one portion of the story that's a quest but it's not the whole of the story, I'm fine. But this whole book is Aragon on the run from Galbatorix, essentially, because this dragon egg was taken from Galbatorix, who in the history of this world was a dragon rider who went evil, and he killed the other riders, and he has been the king of the land for a long time because riders live for so much longer. And we're following Aragon and the storyteller Brom, and later on Murtaugh, as they're on this journey to get Aragon and Saphira to safety and to foil the plans of Galbatorix. So ultimately I would probably give this one like 2 stars. It's very long and kind of not dense, but somewhat wordy. We'll go with that for a YA fantasy. Like, this doesn't look very long, but this is over 500 pages. This is over 500 pages. And you know, I think it's great epic fantasy for kids, and if you have a young person in your life, I would recommend it to them. But for adult readers, if you don't have that nostalgia factor, I don't think it does much for you. And as far as dragons are concerned, I didn't find Saphira to be particularly likable or interesting. She was just kind of bland. And I have read another Christopher Paolini. The Christopher Paolini that I read, which I read prior to this, was To Sleep in the Sea of Stars. And based on these two books, I would say that Christopher Paolini is not a character-driven writer. He is much more a plot-driven writer. It's just that the plot in To Sleep in the Sea of Stars worked for me significantly more than this one, which, I mean, also it's a completely different genre, and he wrote that deep into his adulthood versus as a teenager. But I would give this, I want to give it 1 dragon, but because the only dragon in the whole book is Saphira. She's the only dragon, but I will say she is in dragon form. And so since I gave the other book 1 dragon, because the 1 dragon was in human form, I'll give this 2 dragons, but it's reluctant. It's a reluctant 2 dragons. Speaking of Paolini and his sons, these guys. His sons, dragon rider fantasy, a farm boy, a storyteller comes to town, go on a quest with this dragon egg. Dragon rider fantasy, boy and his dragon, farm boy who is a little nobody, teenage boy, gets a dragon, goes on a quest. These, especially this, has a very similar setup, but Christopher got sons. I'm gonna give him that. He inspired the boys to get on the keyboard and get to typing. So let's talk about Ascendant by Michael R. Miller. This is the first book in the Songs of Chaos series, and this one is like Aragon meets Breath of the Wild, and that element is really intriguing. So we follow our main character Holt, who is almost an apprentice cook. He's a boy that works in the kitchens, and in this society, whatever your parents are is what you are. And so his father is the cook of this castle, and that's what he's gonna grow up to be. And the castle that he works in is one of the outposts for this dragon riding order. And one day he is sent to the hatchery where all the dragon eggs are, and like the head dragon lady is checking all the eggs to see which ones will be presented to riders. And he sees an egg that they are going to toss over because they don't like weakness in their kin. So any eggs that have deformities, because they can kind of see what the dragon inside is going to look like or be like, or their futures, they throw them over the edge. So Holt finds this out, and it doesn't sit right with him, and he feels this connection to the egg, and so he steals the egg, and the dragon hatches, and the dragon is blind. And quickly after that, this revolution coup type thing is happening, because the plot of this is there is this like vermin ghoul army that attacks, and the dragon riders are the only thing that repel this like army of critters away. And there is like political tension because the people think that the dragon riders aren't really necessary and they're too much of a strain on society, even though they need them to fight off these things. So tragedy strikes, and Holt and his crew go on an adventure. And the difference is, because I enjoyed the characters and the plot more in this one, I didn't mind the quest as much, also because we got to different places and like interesting things were happening there. But this is very similar to Aragon. It is very similar. I think if you like this, you would like this. I think if you didn't like this, but like this particular story, but the concept is okay to you, I think you should pick this up. This is indie fantasy. It's on KU, and the Breath of the Wild element comes in because it has an element of like progression and cultivation fantasy, where like you level up, because in this dragon riding order you start out as like a novice, and then you level up to Ascendant, and you level up till you get to the top of Ascendant, and you go to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and it depends on how much power you have. And all the dragons have like different abilities based on their nature. We have like storm dragons, and we have fire dragons, and we have nature dragons, and like all these like interesting things. And one of the ways that you figure out the type of the dragon is by what food they like the most, because foods naturally have these like moats and these elements that are found out in nature, and the dragons can pull, depending on what type of dragon they are, the type of food that is most closely aligned to them, they can pull the most out of it, and it's like a power up to them. And so our main character, because he is a cook, he has a really good knowledge of food, and because he and his father have been working in the kitchens and feeding these dragons, because the dragons are very picky, they like their food cooked a certain way, and there are certain recipes that certain dragons like. And like, for example, one of the dragons in here is a fire dragon, so she loves beef and she likes spicy food, so she likes her food well spiced. And so a portion of this, they're on the quest, and like her keeper doesn't really know how to cook. She tries to cook her food and she doesn't like it, and then Holt, who is the cook, he makes a food and he was like, I would like him to cook my food from now on. And it just, you really see them power up and level up, and they have to cleanse all the bad things that they have ingested out and reforge their powers and make their powers stronger. It's really intriguing and really interesting. I settled on like 3.5 star for this because I enjoyed it, but I didn't love it. But I think Ash has so much personality. He's so cute, and the dragons in here, they like can talk in your head. They usually only talk to their writers, but they can make themselves known to other people. And I think the plot in here is really intriguing. I think that the story is going to go in an interesting direction, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I would give this one 3 dragons because primarily we only have 2 dragons in the story, Ash and Pyrrha. Pyrrha is a fire dragon. I'm not going to tell you the type of dragon Ash is because that's something that you learn as a story because it's a mystery. But we see other dragons. Actually, I'm gonna give it 4 dragons because we see other dragons pretty regularly, and the dragons in here are just really cool and really unique. Like, this is a unique take on dragons that I had not seen before, and I really like that. So here we have some boy and his dragons. We've got 2 stars and 2 dragons. We've got 3.5 stars and 4 dragons. So I'm gonna continue doing the reading, and I will check in with you guys a little bit later. Bye. Hello friends, so I have read the entirety of Dragon Mage by M.L. Spencer. This is originally a standalone, but I think it was received so well that it was decided that the author would expand upon it and make it a series called Riven World. But the first book I think was supposed to come out in 2022 at the beginning, like January, and here we are, October 2023, still no books. So I don't know, maybe it will go back to being a standalone, who knows. But this one is, like I said, it's supposed to be a fantasy standalone, but this one is like a classic fantasy boy and his dragon type of story, and that's like the setup, but it has a little bit of a twist. So in this one we follow primarily our main character Aram, who is a neurodivergent boy, and he really struggles to make friends, and he hyperfixates on like making knots. And at the beginning of the story, there is this storyteller that is coming to town, and he is going to pick an apprentice, and Aram is getting beat up by his friends, and he has this girl he has a crush on, and he's trying to navigate that. And through a series of unfortunate events, both he and his newly found friend Marcus are chosen by the storyteller. Now, to go back to something we talked about earlier we talked about Christopher Paolini and his sons, and let me tell you, Dragon Mage is another son, because the setup is almost exactly the same. We have this like small town, it's like quite a farm, but this small fishing village where this learned storyteller, who is clearly more than a storyteller, comes to town, and he knows more than he should know, and he picks the chosen one, or this young boy, to go on this quest. And of course things happen, and the quest doesn't go in the way that it's supposed to, and we encounter dragons and things like that. So like the initial setup of this one I think is quite similar to that of Aragon. It does branch away from that quickly, but the setup is absolutely the same. So in this one we primarily follow Marcus and Aram, and Aram is like the chosen one. And we learn more about this magic because in this world at the beginning, like long ago, there was this event called the Sundering, which separated the world above from the world below, and the world below is where this magic is just naturally rich in all the parts of the world, and it's called the essence. And in the world above, there is no magic. And then there's also this like in between space called the void, where things go to die, where there are monsters, and at various points either rips are created or rips are formed, and creatures from the void get through and they to the world above, and they attack people and things like that because they're searching for essence. And there are three types of magic users in a way in this world. One of them are the people like Aragon who have this natural well of essence in them. The other are the people who have an affinity for essence, but they are not able to create it themselves, but they are able to siphon it and use it from other people. And then we have people called impervious, who like negate all magic. Magic cannot be used on them. They can block magic from being used on others, etc, etc, etc. And so Marcus is an impervious, and Aram is you know, there's a chosen one and champion and all these other things, but he has a very strong and deep well of this essence inside him. And as the story goes on, we briefly get POV chapters from. My camera battery keeps cutting off, so I am fighting for my life to get this update filmed, but here we are. I don't even know what I was saying last, but what I will say is I enjoyed the world building, I enjoyed the plot, I enjoyed the magic system, but I do think that the thing that I struggled to connect with was the characters. I enjoyed following them, I sympathized with them, but I don't think they were as developed as they could have been for me to have as much emotional connection to them as I would have liked to have, and as I think the story wanted me to have for some of the things to be believable. And I think that one of the ways that could have been done is there is this like 4-year time jump, and during that time some very pivotal things are happening to our characters that really impact the story and impact them. Well, really should impact the story and should impact them, but unfortunately, because we completely skipped over that and there's no like reflection or recollection of the things that are happening, it just is a thing that happened. But to the reader, it seems like it would be a pivotal thing that happens in the story. As far as dragon content, the first half of this is very void of dragons. We have like 2 scenes where we see void dragons, but then I would say like the latter half had more dragons, but we don't get a lot of, like, the dragons aren't characters. They don't have personalities. They don't really like talk or communicate. They can like share like pictures in their mind type thing, but we don't really form a connection to the dragons as characters. The dragons in this one are almost like wolves or horses or something like that, where they are companion, but not to the point where you really have this like relationship with them that would carry a story. Like, I don't even know if I'm describing this very well because it's been a minute since I finished it, but I would probably give this one 3 dragons, and it's probably been a little bit generous, but there were lots of dragons because we had like dragon wings, but we don't really spend a lot of time on the dragons, and for a book that's called Dragon Mage, and honestly it doesn't even make sense because he would be a dragon riding mage, but whatever. It's not anyway, whatever. I enjoyed this. I feel like it has some pacing issues, and it in a way doesn't know what it wants to be, because if the author was gonna expand this to a series instead of a standalone, there definitely would have been some different things happening in the book. Like, I don't think we would have, especially because it's still 800 pages, I don't think we would have skipped over completely that 4-year time jump if we knew this was going to be a series, because we would have had more time to develop those things. So I think that if she was going to expand it, she should have like made that decision before she published this, and wrote it to the point where we would spend more time with the characters, better develop the characters. I have more characters that actually come off the page and aren't just like tools for the plot to continue. So that's that on that. Good morning, friends. Ignore my messy background. I am here to finally give an update on Priory of the Orange Tree. I am 500 pages in. and I haven't filmed an update thus far because up until just now I have been rereading everything that I read previously. If you didn't know about my history with this book, I was buddy reading this with a group of people in 2020. I dismissed the buddy read, got like a couple hundred pages ahead, and I was shamed into putting the book down until we got back on schedule. And then, oh, that's my alarm because I need to be leaving. And then here we are 3 years later, and I never picked the book back up. So I'm finally picking it back up, and it's taking me so long, like a week and a half, to get to 500 pages because I had no desire to pick it up because I'm like, I've read this before, I've read this before, I've read this before. I didn't really even realize how far into this book. I was this far into the book and I put it down, and I was loving it. I was eating it up. It was it would have 100% been a 5-star read had I finished it in 2020. But right now I'm not loving it, and I know that this is a book where I messed up my own experience with it. But 500 pages in, this is my second time reading all that I read before, and I just now got to, like, in the last 2 chapters, got into some new content. So Priory of the Orange Tree, if you're unfamiliar, this is an epic fantasy. Originally was a standalone. It's now a series of standalones in the same universe called The Roots of Chaos. And in this one, we have this world that's divided between the East and the West. They're divided by this religion called Virtuedom, and the 6 virtues, and they also are divided by their position on dragons/worms. In the East, they revere the water dragons, essentially, and in the West, they don't like any dragons because the Nameless One was this dragon that was slain / captured / contained 1,000 years ago. And it is believed in the West, in Virtuedom, that is because as long as a descendant of the saint is on the throne, the Berethnet throne, then the Nameless One will stay chained. But there are other things going on in the world that make it seem like that might not be true. We follow our main character, Edie's, who is a sister of the Priory of the Orange Tree, which is this like almost religious nun warrior order, and they are sent to the various corners of the world to protect people from the Nameless One. They fight the Dragonfire, and to stop chaos from corrupting all of the world. And our main character, Ede, has been sent to infiltrate the court of the Berethnet Queen, Sabran the Ninth. And there also is like this simmering of a sapphic romance between Ede and Sabran the Queen. And Ede is undercover. She's been undercover for 8 years, and at the beginning of the novel we see things that are a bit in an uproar. So we see one of the links in the chain of Virtuedom has broken away and decided to pledge the Nameless One. The worms are rising and they're attacking, and the 1,000 years are up, almost up, and the Queen Sabran the Ninth is overdue for having an heir because that's what they believe is keeping the Nameless One chained. But things are going on with that, and so we follow 4 POV characters. We follow Ede, who I would say is our main character, Tane, Loth, and Niclais. And Niclais is like this ousted surgeon who is like an alchemist, and he is involved with a lot of different plots. And then Tane is our dragon rider, and she is up to some different things. So in the 500 pages that I've read, like, it's feeling very meh, and the last thing you want is an 800-page meh book. But here we are. I am happy to report that I have finished Priory of the Orange Tree after 3 long years. I enjoyed the new content a lot more than I enjoyed like the stuff that I was rereading, and I think that if I was going into this for the first time, I think I would have enjoyed it more. I think the perfect time for me to be reading it was when I was reading it in the beginning, like 3 years ago. I think it definitely would have been a 5-star read for me. I like the romance. I like the way that it was centered. I know that one of the most prominent complaints that people have about this book is that we spend hundreds of pages building up to the return of the Nameless One and the fight with the Nameless One, and that battle only takes maybe 20 pages and it's resolved relatively quickly and honestly kind of easily. And I can see that. I personally don't mind it because a lot of the build-up wasn't just, oh, we're fighting, we're training, but it's like people becoming aware, people like the power players getting into position, the tools needed, you know, being discovered, and these mysteries that needed to be solved, and all these other things. Like, that was deleted. It wasn't just, oh, we're preparing for this battle for all this time. It's just like, it's gonna come, and then it came. For a book that's also a standalone, I definitely think that we could have a sequel. Like, I know that Samantha Shannon has written a prequel novel, and I know and she's sold another book in this series. I don't know where it's gonna fall in the timeline, but I think we could definitely have a direct sequel to Priory with like what this new world looks like post Nameless One, what you know, Ede is going to do and be in the future, what the you know, the division of the world and these 4 rulers and how they've come together. What that's gonna look like now that they are not united by the Nameless One. Sabran and her plans with Virtudom and with Ennis and like the queenship and all these other things. Like, I feel like we could definitely have a direct sequel to this, because I think there are a lot of questions, a lot of things left open-ended that I would like explored. But ultimately I did really enjoy it. I would probably give this like a 3.5 star, which is sad because it's such a long book. Like, it took me a week to read, and it's 800 something pages, and you never want to leave an 800 plus page book, like a super long book, and just be like, it was good, it was okay, but like not a new favorite. Like, I want to love it, I want to hate it, and if I'm hating it, I'm probably gonna DNF it. But you know, with a book this long, the cover is gorgeous. I'm definitely gonna stay on my TBR, and I do plan on reading A Day of Fallen Night pretty soon, because I do think that it's gonna be nominated for the Goodreads Choice Awards. I don't know if it'll make it to the top 20, I mean the top 10, but I'm confident that it'll be in the top 20, if nothing else, for like name recognition. But it does have like 20,000 ratings and like a high enough like average rating, or 20,000 rating and reviews and then a high enough average rating, so I think it would make it. I'm pretty confident in that. But yeah, we have reached the end of the dragon vlog. How many dragons would I give Priory? I would give it 2 dragons. And well, if I'm counting the worms too, then I would give it 3 dragons. So okay, I guess I'll give it 3 dragons. I'll give it 3 dragons because like the worms and dragonkind, they're 2 sides of the same coin, let's say. But the only dragon that's really a character is Nyamathun, which is Tane's dragon. And then the later we get into the story, we do see some other dragons, but other than Nyamathun, we don't see any dragons. We only see some worms occasionally. But I hate that the vlog is ending on a little bit of a whimper. So in closing, I read 10 dragon books for this vlog, and unfortunately I'm not leaving the vlog with a new favorite. And I think some of that is because like some of my favorite dragon books I've already read heading into this one, and I still have like 5 to 10 dragon books left on my TBR, so who knows. You know, I'm always down to read a dragon book. I'm gonna keep reading it, and maybe one day, you know, I'll read some more, but I'm definitely ready for a little bit of a change. If I had to say what my favorite book of the vlog was, it's definitely Ascendant by Michael R. Miller. Definitely gonna be continuing with the series. Really recommend picking it up. I really enjoyed this one. This one is the one that's like Aragon meets Breath of the Wild. And then my least favorite, I cannot find it, and I have been looking for it for over an hour, so I'm like, maybe I hid it from myself, I don't know. My least favorite was Dragonfall by L.R. Lamb. That book is definitely getting unhauled quickly and was a chore to read. So I hope you have enjoyed spending some time with me and reading these dragon books. If you made it to the end of the video, of course you gotta leave a dragon. Like, that's the only thing we could have you leave at the end of this video. And if there are any other like magical creatures, monsters, whatever you want to see in the creature feature series, let me know. I think the next one that I'm planning to do are gonna be witches, since it's like spooky season, but obviously spooky season is coming to an end. But I do think the next one's gonna be witches. But if there's anything you want to see beyond that, please let me know, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.